That's Enough Out of You podcast is sponsored by Todd John's Law. Unfortunately, bad things happen to good people, whether it's the result of an auto accident caused by the carelessness of another driver or being charged with a crime. Dealing with the aftermath of a personal injury accident or being involved with the criminal justice system can be extremely difficult. That's why, whatever you're facing, you should never go it alone. You need an experienced attorney who will stand by you every step of the way. Todd is experienced, licensed, trusted, respected, and guaranteed. No one will work harder or more diligently on your behalf, and he will personally handle your case from beginning to end. Located on Drinker Street in Dunmore, Pennsylvania, Todd has been representing the legal rights of Scranton and Wilkes-Barre personal injury victims and those accused of a crime for over 20 years. At Todd John's Law, the utmost priority is ensuring that your rights are always protected and that your case is resolved as quickly and fairly as possible so that you can move on with your life. Call Todd John's Law at 570-876-6903. With Todd John's Law, you will receive equal justice under the law. Hello and welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I am your host, Bill Rader, and joining me, as always, my co-host, Sean Kane. Sean, what's going on?
Billy Raids, how you doing today in this windstorm, buddy?
I'm still here. I was so as we record this, we're about 3 weeks actually, since the Christmas holiday, and I finally had some time to take all of the lights down outside on the house, and I was like, if you know, I was like hanging on to the posts on the front porch.
The wind is bad, buddy.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. And then, of course, as I'm up on the little step ladder, there was a snow squall, so I couldn't see anything. But I got all the lights down. That's the important thing.
Plus, you're thousands of feet up on that big hill, Billy.
Right, I'm looking down on everybody. So, yeah, the weather is different here than it is down. It's probably a difference of about 20 degrees, right?
Oh yeah, down in my house at the bottom of your street. Yeah.
So it's I'll we'll just leave it at that.
Well, we got a guest today, Billy, but before we get to that, I think we got a little bit of an issue we got to bring up.
Well, before we even get to that issue, Sean, one quick thing.
Go ahead.
So as I said, we're recording this middle of January, and our friend of the podcast, Rick Otto, just appeared on another friend of the podcast, Bruce DeTorres, on his show World Stage, and gave us a shout out. So I just want to thank Rick and thank Bruce for that.
Great guys.
Yeah, absolutely. We love having them on our show, and we love going on Bruce's show. So Rick, we thank you for that shout out. Always love it when you come on, and it's just nice to hear that our names kind of mentioned with some of these other really cutting edge shows out there that are trying to do the same thing that we're trying to do, which is tell the truth.
And that always comes with a price, Billy, and we're going to talk about that now.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sean. Why don't we talk about that?
Well, we're on like 30 different applications. A lot of people like to listen to us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, etc., the traditional podcast apps, but some people do like to listen to us on YouTube. And what I noticed on YouTube, and I noticed this for a while now, is that our episodes will be the views on the episodes they'll be at one level, and then all of a sudden, instead of going up, they're going down, and then they'll go up for a little bit, and then they'll go down. And I started to track the last, dozen episodes or so, and I noticed like hundreds of views are getting gutted. And the one we have up on Whitey Bulger right now, that's been gutted terribly. The one that Rick Otto, the last one, speaking of Rick Otto, that he was on, that got gutted unbelievable. I mean, there had to be over 500 views that got gutted out of that. And of course, me and you talked about that, and you talked about the bot program that they run, right, and stuff. Yeah. But then I talked to Rick about it, and Rick sent me a nice link about this doctor that did a study on the algorithms that YouTube uses. And what they do, Bill, is they target shows like ours, that the algorithms go after shows that kind of go against the official record, the official story that the government puts out there. And they do this. They gut the views. They censor different things. They demonetize shows for various reasons. One of the things they do to us is they put that stupid Wikipedia disclaimer on our episodes, like the ones with Jim and Lisa, and the ones that say, Oswald, the ones we talk about Lee Harvey Oswald, they'll put out the Wikipedia page that says Oswald was the lone assassin, and basically, that these two guys are just, telling you a bunch of lies. And then the one we did, the one of Vietnam, they put out a disclaimer on that, talking about, that Kennedy didn't change much and this and that. So anything that you try to tell the truth, they put that garbage out there on. And it's just dishonest, Bill. It's just, YouTube's owned by Google. And I'm so glad I sold my Google stock. It's just typical what you talked about a little while ago, Bill, corporate America. And this is corporate America at its worst.
Yeah.
It's just garbage, Bill. It's completely garbage, and it's terrible.
And that with they do this with a lot of shows, and it's not, I don't think
it's not just us. It's right, the algorithms, Bill. If you watch this video, and Rick Otto has a link, I'm going to try to put it on my social media. But the doctor explains how, this professor, he explains how these algorithms target certain shows, and they go after the hashtag certain things, and they see like JFK or something, and they target those shows.
And it doesn't matter, like shows like Joe Rogan, where he's got, tens, hundreds of thousands of views, or, millions of views even. Doesn't really matter with those shows to sponsors. They're still gonna, well, with us, when it's the difference between, 100 views and maybe 500 views, that really makes a difference for us, and it really sucks that we have to deal with that. I mean, obviously, what are we going to do? YouTube controls it. We it's a free platform. We don't really have much in the way of options if we want to get our content out there. But it really does suck the way they they do that. They cut views. They demonetize. I mean, we really should have a lot more views than what's showing there, and we really should be. I mean, they are running ads on our shows, Sean.
I know. We're not getting paid for them like we are with the other ones. Like Apple doesn't do this. Spotify, the other, the ones that we use through Buzzsprout, all of those, we don't have any issues with those.
Right.
They don't take views away. They don't demonetize. They don't, we're able to get for ads there. And it's just, YouTube is it's just a joke, Billy. And it's just, and the reason we still continue to put on YouTube is because I know, talking to a lot of our listeners on social media, they like to listen on YouTube. So long as, our viewers want it, we'll put it on YouTube. But, when you look at it and you see, oh, this only had 100 views, well, you got to understand that's garbage because they gutted it. Like Rick Otto, he would have been like over 1,000 views just on YouTube, and they just gutted the episode. They just took all those views away, and the stuff when we have Jim on and Lisa, and I see that stupid Wikipedia thing they put on there. It's just it's really just, it's disgusting, Billy. It's disgusting because, we know the evidence. We know what the evidence shows, and they're just putting out this lie, and they're tagging it to our video, and we can't do anything about it. Right. Corporate America, buddy.
Yeah. So, this means a couple different things, Sean. It means that, we obviously we're trying to make a little bit of money doing this. So we're going to start running, ads, a lot more ads on our show. We've got some sponsors lined up, and we thank them. I mean, this is, we started, basically, we put the word out that, we're looking for sponsors. We're looking for small businesses that want to advertise on our show, local businesses local to us. And
not all the local. We got
right.
some that are national.
And that's, and that's what we're looking to do. So, if you're listening to our program and you have a small business and you think, hey, you know what, want to increase my online commerce, increase my visibility, let us know. I mean, we're happy to. We've gotten pretty sizable number of responses, Sean, of sponsors so far. So hopefully we can continue that.
Yeah, we're doing good, and it's just this YouTube thing is just frustrating, but we'll deal with it. We'll continue to deal with it, and it is what it is, Billy. But just so people know, this is what's happening, and it's not just us, but it's any podcast that's going against the grain a little bit. They're going to be targeted.
Yeah. And the other thing is, Sean, there are some of our episodes on YouTube that have 5, 6, 7, 800 views, and I know I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it. The crazy thing is, we have all these views. We only have about 170 some subscribers on our YouTube channel.
You have to wonder if the subscribers, the same thing's happening there, Billy.
I don't know about that, Sean, because I
don't know either.
Steadily go up. I've never seen any taken away.
That's true. I haven't either,
but I would like to encourage, if you're listening to our show, just, hit that subscribe button. We would really, really appreciate it. It helps us. It brings us up as far as the algorithm with shows when people are searching for things. So, if you like what you're hearing, even if you don't like what you're hearing, hit that subscribe button, and it helps us for sure.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah. All right, Sean, what else? Anything else before we get to our guest today?
No, I think we're good, Billy. I think we're good. We got that off our chest, because that's just been frustrating. It's just been aggravating for a long time, and it's typical corporate America, buddy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Freedom of speech, buddy. Except if you say something they don't like.
Well, that's a topic for a different day, I think.
Yeah, we won't get into that.
But we have a great guest coming on today. So without further ado, here we go with Jason. So Jason Voiovich joins us from sunny Naples, Florida. Jason, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. You are correct. The weather is wonderful here. It usually is. So we're very happy. Great to meet you guys, and great to be on the show.
Yeah, likewise. Jason is the author.
Great to meet you, Jason.
Yeah, Jason is the author of 2 books. The first one will let's see, Marketer in Chief: How Each President Sold the American Idea, and Booze, Babe, and the Little Black Dress: How Innovators of the Roaring '20s Created the Consumer Revolution. I hope I got those titles correct. Did I, Jason?
No, it's perfect. Thank you.
All right, great. So some really cool ideas and topics in those books. And Sean, we'll get it kicked off.
Yeah. So Jason, before we get into the specifics of both of the books, do you want to just give a little introduction on yourself and why you wrote these books before we get into the specifics?
Yeah, I am a practicing fractional chief marketing officer. So that means I market my own service to multiple smaller to mid-sized organizations. My background is mostly in upstream product marketing, developing new products and bringing them to market. And I'm just an overall curious person. I love history. I've been a long-time listener, first-time caller sort of things. So, for me, writing history books was kind of a way to give back. It's one of the big reasons that I wrote these books. But I think the other big one is as I practice my own craft and I read history out there and I just read voraciously, it's one of the perspectives that I never really got. I never got, there were histories of, political campaigns, there were histories of presidents, there was histories of, kind of consumer culture and new innovations, the railroads, automobiles, airplanes, you name it. But I never really saw any of those books written from my perspective, what it would be like to kind of develop and market those products, and how do you communicate? It's kind of like historians are great at telling history, but most of them have never been in the field. They really haven't done the job. So it's kind of like asking a historian to write about carpentry. That's great. They can write a great story about carpentry, but it's really different to get a story about the history of carpentry from a carpenter. And that's sort of the same idea. I wanted to give the market that perspective. So that's why I did it. I love doing it. I love my field, and I thought this is a perspective that was missing out in the marketplace.
Interesting. So let's get into the first book I want to talk about, Marketer in Chief. Kind of give us an overview of the book.
I think the most important thing that we don't think about that much anymore as Americans, really, is that the United States is an innovation in and of itself. When you think about we think about democracy kind of going back to the Greek and Roman traditions, but the modern democracy is a really new idea. This kind of American idea that it wasn't about being Greek or being Roman or being French or having a king or having a military dictator. That the American idea was a new thing. In the 1770s, it was an idea of a government of laws, but not people. So it wasn't a personality, it wasn't a king, it wasn't, that you had enough firepower. It was a new way it was an innovation in government, kind of, by the people, for the people. And we sometimes forget about that as Americans. And I wanted to kind of think about that as, being in product development and innovation. I thought, what an interesting way to recast what the challenges that different presidents faced is if they were trying to launch a new product. And, people like George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, those first few folks were kind of like startup leaders. Those are the kind of people who there weren't even blank forms. Think about it for a second. You're running a government and there isn't even a piece of paper that says name goes here.
Right. Yeah.
They had to create everything. And
Yeah.
is that so unlike a modern startup that you wake up and you think, okay, I've got this new widget I'm coming to the market with, and there's nothing. I got to create everything from a blank sheet of paper. And it gave me such a new perspective to kind of look at each one, a different pair of glasses to wear. And I found that many of the histories of the presidents were pretty lacking in that regard. They just didn't look at it that way. I just think no one had thought to look at it that way before. So that's the big idea. So I cover every single president. It's not just the cool president or the ones people have heard of. There's a chapter on Franklin Pierce. There's a chapter on James K. Polk. I mean, there are people that most of us would not get right on trivia night at the bar, but they're worth talking about because they faced a different challenge than we do today, and it's just a different way to look at it. So that's the big idea behind the book.
So let's talk about how each president sold that American idea, and let's go over the best and worst presidents from a marketing perspective. Let's start with the 5 best.
Yeah, and this is your listeners are going to be thinking in their mind, all right, I know who I'm looking for and who I'm thinking in my mind, but we can have really different ideas of who made a great leader,
right,
and who made a great marketer. And these are different things. These are really different things. So let's start with the easy ones. Hey, Ronald Reagan, no question. He wasn't known as the great communicator for nothing. Even the Democrats in the 1980s, and I'm a child of the 1980s, so I grew up with Ronald Reagan. Everyone understood how good he was at this. Walter Mondale from where I grew up in Minnesota learned it the hard way.
Right.
Very much. And I tell that story in the book, that it's one of the examples of how good he was at that. But when you think about the best marketers and the best communicators, you got to go back a little further than that. So there are a few that let's kind of use this to go back in time.
Okay.
And go backwards. Now, our parents and our grandparents probably remember Harry Truman. And for most of us, he was the guy that had to take over from Roosevelt. Those are not easy shoes to fill. Great communicator in his own right. But if we remember the 1948 campaign, you remember that's one of the most famous political images anyone's ever seen is the Harry Truman holding up the newspaper that says Dewey defeats Truman.
Truman, right? Yeah.
Right, come from behind. And most people forget, guys, that Harry Truman did not only beat Governor Dewey, he also beat two other Democrats. You know, the kind of a progressive wing and a conservative wing in the Democratic Party. He had to beat two Democratic challengers and the Republican. So, you know, this was epic on a scale that I think most people today wouldn't quite understand. It would be as if George W. Bush beat Clinton and Perot and another dude
Right.
that was out there who never showed up. So obviously, really, worth studying. Let's go back even further to Calvin Coolidge. Uh, we can talk about Calvin Coolidge, and I talk a lot about that. He was president during the Roaring Twenties, and really was part of the inspiration for my second book. I learned so much about the 1920s that I didn't understand. And Calvin Coolidge partnered with kind of advertiser Bruce Barton, founder of BBDO out in New York. And he was the guy who started to figure out how to mass market presidential campaigns. It was the first time that Bruce Barton figured out how to make Calvin Coolidge into a product with features for different audiences. Just revolutionary, changed politics. Everything most people hate about politics dates back to that. You know, so two more. We got five best. We got two more, and we're going to keep going backwards. James K. Polk, dark horse for sure. Most people don't know that. He was only president for 4 years. But when we think about the United States before Polk and the United States after Polk, this was basically double the size of the United States with the captured territory from Mexico. So it was the first time that sea to shining sea, kind of, it was the idea of manifest destiny, and Polk was the one who figured that out. So from a product perspective, made the United States essentially what it looks like on the map today. Wow. With a couple of changes. And most people don't know that. And most people don't think about that as marketing. But in product development, we think about like, hey, Amazon acquired Audible, Amazon acquired Zappos. Those are the sorts of things you think about. Okay. Last one on the five best, James Madison. Hey, during the Revolutionary War, it was, kind of unlike the Revolutionary War, really. The War of 1812 was kind of the first time that the United States was the United States of America, not the United States of America. If kind of prior to 1812, you were a Virginian, you were a Pennsylvanian, you were a New Yorker first, and you were an American second. Because that's just kind of the way it was back then. You were, maybe at best you were a New Englander or a Southerner. But really, the War of 1812 is the first kind of unified conflict. And James Madison took advantage of that to create kind of this idea of the United States as a one place and the states subordinate to that. So really kind of a shared purpose, and really thought about making sure that people thought about this as the United States of America as a kind of a unified whole. Those are the five best, right? I know we're going to talk about JFK. We absolutely will talk about JFK. So we'll put a pin in that one for now. Okay. Is that fair? Fair,
sure,
gentlemen?
Sure.
Yeah. Sounds good.
All right. You ready? You ready for the
five worst? Yeah, let's do it.
We're going to go the opposite way. We're going to start. We're going to start early and come later.
Okay.
Okay. Around after you get past the kind of the founding fathers and their kids, the Thomas Jeffersons, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, those sort of folks. You get into this kind of weird area around the Civil War where you get some real stinkers. Okay. Franklin Pierce was a stinker. Very tough. He could have very easily annexed Cuba. Cuba wanted to become a state. Most people don't know that as well. Part of my family is Cuban. And I know that story. They wanted to become a state, and Pierce fumbled the ball. That's just the best way to say it.
Wow.
There's a thing, there, there was a kind of a treaty that got messed up, and really it kind of pushed Cuba on a totally different path. So again, we could have been a very different country at that time, could have been a very different expansion, but that kind of cut it off right there.
Yeah, I mean, just think about how different, uh, I mean,
Yeah, we'll talk about JFK, right? I
Right.
mean, how
Absolutely.
different would have that been?
absolutely right. I mean, boy, that would
Changes
have,
everything.
yeah.
Yeah,
No
we all would have been drinking better rum. I do think I do know that for sure.
yeah, for
Boy,
sure.
they're good at it. Pierce was the first one. Next one, James Buchanan. Oh boy. And it's probably not fair. He was the president right before right before the Civil War, but it's not like people didn't know it was coming. If
Right.
you read that era of history, you get this thing called Bleeding Kansas. The war had essentially already started in Missouri and Kansas at that time, and it was a complete mess. And Buchanan was so bad at his job that you could almost anyone would have been better. But you couldn't have almost had worse. Obviously, I have Lincoln. Lincoln is almost his own story. It's almost iconic in his own way. But setting that aside, you get right after Lincoln, and you couldn't have found a worse follow-on than Andrew Johnson. So you just think about the bookends to Abraham Lincoln, James
Right.
Buchanan, and Andrew Johnson. You
Yeah.
know, you just think, what a dumpster fire. Uh, and he had everything going for him. He was a Southerner. He stayed loyal to the Union. He had every opportunity to kind of bridge the gap, and he was just pathologically incapable of doing so. There's a wonderful story in the book I retell about, when he was being signed in as vice president or sworn in, he was hammered, absolutely drunk. No
Wow.
question about it. He had had the equivalent of 7 or 8 full belts of whiskey.
Yikes.
I'm not sure I'd be standing, and that's Abraham
Right.
Lincoln
Wow.
is reputed to have looked over and said, I'm surprised he's still vertical.
Oh, wow.
Um, you know, so be that as it may, you have to really fast forward to get another tough one, and this is tough because they're going to be, we're gonna make the left wing and the right wing mad here. So we're ready. We're ready.
We're ready.
We do that
We are.
anyway.
We do that anyway, Dave.
Yeah, you should do that anyway. This not a big surprise. Jimmy Carter was a tough one
Right.
during president. Once he left the presidency, everything changed. Yeah,
Right.
much better post president than
Absolutely. Yeah.
than a president. But that kind of crisis of confidence speech, he never used the word malaise. By the way, you can read the whole thing. I've read it. I've watched it several times to write the chapter. And funny story. I reached out to an author who kind of wrote about that specifically, and boy, he was not happy with me for taking that perspective. I won't name names, but there was an interesting kind of note in his book, and it was a guy on Carter's staff who was a bartender. And one of the most insightful quotes, and I think your readers or listeners probably don't know this, and will probably get a kick out of it. He said that people listen to political speeches like they listen to rock music. They kind of get the rhythm and the beat, but they don't remember the words. And once you kind of hear that, you're like, oh, I totally get it. I'm just listening to how it makes me feel.
Right.
The words can, I mean, because name a rock and roll song and then tell me the words. Good luck. But everybody can get that's why you can get a rock and roll song. They have those challenges where, like, hey, I'm going to give you 3 notes or 4 notes or 5 notes. You guess the song. Not a problem. I give you 4 or 5 words of Stairway to Heaven. I mean, like you can get it from the first chord. But you might, how many times have people gotten the words totally wrong on rock songs?
Sure.
So it just sort of doesn't matter. in the same way people think it does. You know, yes, I have to think about media people love analyzing political speeches. Most of the rest of us don't care.
No,
They just don't think about it that much.
no.
You know, and that's one thing about JFK that we'll talk about is JFK made people feel a certain way.
Right.
That's part of what made him effective is just that persona. And people think, well, you know, the words in his speeches are really epic. Well, sure, some of them were, and a lot of them were real stinkers. It didn't matter. He just, when you looked at him, you felt a certain way.
Right.
And that was key. And when you looked at Jimmy Carter, you felt a really different way.
Right.
You felt you felt depressed. You know, you felt like you were being scolded. I watched that speech, and I'd invite your listeners to go watch that speech again if they're feeling too happy about themselves. Go check that one out.
What's that quote, Jason? I think the quote is, and I never remember who the people I'm quoting, but it's people don't remember what you say to them. They remember the way you make them feel. I believe that's
exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's kind of another way to say the same thing. You know, that's, you know, they won't remember what you said. They remember how you made them feel. And that's something that when you think about, you know, politicians, and you think, well, you know, this politician was, you know, couldn't start a fire rubbing two matches together. You think, well, did he make you feel good? And you know, that's the sort of thing that, you know, people think about when we talk about kind of best and worst. Now,
and we will be right back. We'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsors, Residence Inn by Marriott in Scranton. Discover comfort and convenience in Scranton. If you're planning a short or extended stay in the Scranton, Pennsylvania area, Residence Inn by Marriott, located at 947 Viewmont Drive, will ensure your stay is nothing short of exceptional. Their friendly team is committed to providing you with top-notch service and a memorable experience. Whether you're in town for business, leisure, or a bit of both, Residence Inn Scranton has you covered. They offer free Wi-Fi, an indoor pool, meeting and event space, complimentary hot breakfast, a fitness center, and an on-site market. And Residence Inn Scranton is pet-friendly. Your home away from home. Residence Inn Scranton features spacious studio, 1-bedroom, and 2-bedroom suites, and all are complete with a fully equipped kitchen. There's a cozy fireplace lounge and an outdoor barbecue area. Call 570-343-5121 or go to Marriott.com for more information. Residence Inn Scranton, where hospitality meets home. That's Enough Out of You is also sponsored by Fairfield Inn by Marriott. Located at 949 Viewmont Drive in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Fairfield Inn Scranton exemplifies travel made easy. They offer stylish guest rooms with plush bedding, complimentary hot breakfast with healthy options, one of the area's premier hotel fitness centers, as well as nearby dining options. While you're staying at Fairfield Scranton, make sure you check out some local attractions like the Scranton Cultural Center, the Electric City Trolley Museum, Montage Mountain Resorts, and the Steamtown National Historic Site. Catch a Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins game or a concert at the Mohegan Sun Arena, or take the historic Lackawanna Coal Mine tour. Fairfield Inn Scranton is in the center of it all. Experience comfort and convenience in Scranton at the Fairfield Inn by Marriott. Call 570-343-5121 or go to Marriott.com for more information. Fairfield Inn Scranton, where hospitality meets home.
Kind of the one I get in the most trouble for is putting our most recent full-term president in here, Donald Trump. And because most people feel like, hey, it's Donald Trump, he's great at commanding a room. He is great at tapping into, you know, different feelings. He is great at a clever turn of phrase or a nickname, and he is outstanding at that sort of thing. Love him or hate him, he can make a nickname stick like glue. He can change the entire conversation that way. Here's the problem. it's really easy to persuade people who already agree with you. And if you can't persuade people who don't, you're not good at marketing.
Right.
That's not ideological.
Right.
That's just the facts. And he has done a really bad job at persuading people who are not already predisposed to agreeing with him, despite multiple opportunities to do so.
Right.
Seems pathologically incapable of doing that. And if you take a look at the best, you compare him to like Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan had something called Reagan Democrats. You remember those?
Oh,
Sure.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
we all do.
My
There are a
pa-
whole bunch of them.
My parents were. Yeah.
You bet.
Yeah.
You bet. My parents were too. And there are no Trump Democrats.
Right. That's for sure. I mean, getting back to Reagan for just a second, I mean, Reagan, as you said, Jason, he made you feel good, right? Even when things were going horribly wrong, you could still, you almost kind of thought, okay, once Reagan addresses the nation, things are going to be okay, because he had a way of talking, a way of, kind of putting people at ease, whether it was a joke or, just his demeanor. You could always sort of count on him. And, and I was just like you, I was a kid in the 80s, and I would always watch the presidential addresses, the State of the Union, and just to kind of watch him and see how he spoke. Trump was the exact opposite. I mean, he alienated so many people and couldn't figure out how to get them back. But what I will say, Jason, is this: Trump is more of a brand than anything else. And, I took a couple of marketing classes in college. I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but I did learn about brand loyalty. And I don't think there has ever been a president that has brand loyalty the way that Trump does. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think there's people ask me, well, what's the limit of looking at a president as a CMO? And that's it. Really, that's kind of what it comes down to, is when you take that to its logical conclusion and you say, well, it's only marketing and it's only brand, that's what you end up with. You end up with because brands are exclusive things, right? Where, if you have an Apple phone, you're probably not going to get a Google Android phone. They tend to be mutually exclusive things. It doesn't mean you have to hate an Android phone or hate an Apple phone or vice versa, but many people are weird and they do.
Yeah.
And the president of the United States, I might argue that going that way kind of takes it to a logical extreme that's kind of that's down the wrong path. I feel like the president is not a president. They're not a brand. They're not kind of cultivating an audience that is distinct from another audience. They are kind of stewards of the American brand, kind of the American idea. And that's something bigger than an audience. It's bigger. It's a driving purpose. Someone like a Simon Sinek would say that is a just cause.
Sure.
And, I feel like Donald Trump's version of brand is a very narrow definition of the term. It is, it's workable from a consumer marketing perspective, but it's somehow lacking, when it comes to that. And here's where it falls down. And we can see that now as, we think about the next campaign kind of heating up. And I'm not very bullish on, I know most people are kind of think, at least on the right wing, feel like, well, it's kind of Donald Trump's to lose. And I'm not so sure that that's an inevitability. And kind of here's why. If you were to think about, and I think it's a good way to put it, that Donald Trump is a brand. Well, brands have to be new. They've got to be fresh. They always have to have something kind of new going on, because it's brands don't have 4-letter words. Brands have 3-letter words. The most important ones are YOU and NEW.
Right.
So when I think about that, what new ideas is he talking about? What new things? Back in 2016, he had the wall. There were the things you could agree with or you don't, but they were simple things. They're easy to get their hands around. They were new. They sounded like new ideas. Well, what's there now? It's just more of
Right.
I'm mad. Like, well,
Right.
that's not enough. And for a brand, that's not enough. Now, for a political campaign, you could build on kind of anger and resentment, but as a brand, you can't. Brands are all about the new, the exciting, the novel, and he's not anymore. I think that folks like Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy have a real edge there, and it would not surprise me at all to see one or both of them uh, jump to the top before this is all over.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. We have a long way to go. I think what a lot of people are saying now, not to get into a whole political discussion here, but I think a lot of people are saying they're kind of running to be for the VP slot. But I agree with you in that there's nothing new. I mean, you probably wouldn't be able to tell a Trump rally speech, from yesterday, any different from 2 years ago. They're probably, very, very similar. What I will say, though, is to his base, it doesn't seem to matter, and that's something that is kind of a new, something we haven't really seen before. We generally, with politicians, and I'm talking about more broadly, not necessarily, a base, but more broadly, we like to see, new ideas. Obviously, things are changing all the time, and we want to hear something new, as you said, from our politicians. And you're right, there's nothing new coming from him.
And I think that's part of the problem, though, because when you look at Trump and you just look at him from a marketing perspective, I mean, he's not even trying to market his brand to the people that don't agree with him. He's not even attempting that. He's just solidifying his base. And to your point, Jason, and yours too, Bill, he's not offering anything new. He's basically just offering, he's on this like vendetta he's going to have against people who, in his mind wronged him. And that seems to be his focus this time, is how he's going to get back at those people.
Well, think about that for a second. You just like, yeah, there's a smaller and smaller group, a much smaller group than in 2016 that is responsive to that sort of message. Yeah, they're out there. Yeah, but it's a smaller group than it was before. It's tighter, but it's smaller.
So let me ask you, can I ask you a question, Jason, real quick? Kind of a hypothetical thing. Let's say, tomorrow you were placed in charge of his his campaign, right? What would you say to him to because you have you from a marketing perspective, what he needs to do in order to broaden his appeal. What would you say assuming he would, even listen, what would you say to him?
Yeah, that's a big if, isn't it?
He'd probably end up firing you, Jason.
Yeah, he doesn't have a good history of that.
No.
I would ask, I'd ask a question, and the question would be, what's this cycle's wall? Build the wall. What's the thing? What's what's the drum you're going to beat? Because even if you didn't, it was totally unrealistic, and it wasn't going to happen. And what's the thing that could reach out to people who are, your base is going to agree with you, whatever you say, but what's that thing that is gonna, is gonna hit that? Maybe it's about inflation, maybe it's whatever it is. It almost doesn't matter what it is,
right.
But something that's going to capture that kind of, what's gonna capture that imagination. The nice thing about a wall is it was a physical thing. That was that same idea of Bill Clinton in the 90s was, it's the economy, stupid. Just keep beating that drum. Because if you don't have anything and you're just talking about a lot of different stuff, well, who's going to pay attention to that?
Right. Even going back to George Bush, the father, His, read my lips, right? No new taxes. That was the drum he was beating the entire time.
Yeah, it's almost like what's that, what's the slogan, what's the message, and how do you keep it really simple so
Right.
that, most people think about, when they're into politics, and some of your listeners are really into politics and some really aren't. The ones who are into politics they've been thinking as we've been talking here, and they've got a whole list of things. They got different avenues, and they got all these different arguments, they kind of pro and con. Most of the other people, and those of you who really aren't into politics, and I kind of count myself among you, uh, you're not thinking about it that much. And
Sure.
for those people, and that's most people, by the way, don't you can't read the opinion section of the newspapers. Those people are disproportionately into politics. That's just who they are. Most people, 80, 90% of people don't really pay much attention until the summer before the election, if that.
Right. Yeah.
So what is that thing that people can kind of remember? They're not going to think about it much at all. They're gonna kind of look at the horse race. They're going to see, does this thing feel right to me? And that's the thing, that Build the Wall felt right to a lot of people, even if it didn't make a lot of sense. And it really is about kind of how it does make people feel. And a lot of folks just that whole thing rubs people the wrong way. They think, well, it's politics. There should be something more to it than that. We should be more civically minded than that. Uh, That's great. I mean, when the unicorn shows up at my door and I can ride it off into the sunset, I'll let you know. But until
Yeah.
then, we have to deal with the world as it exists, not the world that we would like it to be.
Yeah. Agree. All right, Sean, where do we want to go from here? Do we want to talk
Well,
about
I just like to comment on your list there, Jason. The best and the worst. I mean, a fascinating list. Ronald Reagan. I agree with you, even though I don't really like Reagan as a president, but I've said that on the show before. But it's interesting because that's not the question about what kind of job he did, but as a marketer, there's no doubt about how great Ronald Reagan was as a marketer. I mean, I definitely agree there. He's in the five best. And Calvin Coolidge is very interesting because Coolidge is really the person who linked religion to politics, which I'd like to get into if we have time today, get into that a little deeper. And then on your five worst, I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, Trump definitely, because he didn't market to the people who didn't agree with him. And then Carter's interesting because like you already mentioned, I think Carter was did so many great things after he was president, but as a president, he just couldn't sell that idea, the American way. I mean, I definitely agree with that. So it's just fascinating. But let's talk about some of the people who aren't on this list, Jason. And of
Yeah.
course, that's going to be, our favorite is JFK. So could we talk a little about how JFK marketed the American idea?
I think, and your listeners will know this really well, that JFK represented a generational change. And there have been a few of those,
Right.
in American history, where kind of a new generational takeover, really similar to what happened with Teddy Roosevelt when McKinley was shot and passed away, and Roosevelt became president. He was the youngest president to that time. So there are a lot of parallels there. Very interventionist, very up there. And you can kind of listen to there are some recordings, early recordings of some of his speeches. And your listeners might be really surprised to go and find some, and how, yeah, he was this kind of nasally voiced New Yorker, Roosevelt, Teddy at least. Franklin had soft butter in his voice that just, there's something about that kind of patrician sort of tone and cadence. But Teddy Roosevelt was like, the words couldn't come out of his mouth fast enough. He was so much energy. And when you think about that, just like, well, how did Teddy Roosevelt make you feel? He made you feel like the guard had changed. This was new. We could do anything. And think about JFK in the same way. Like he's
Right.
young, he's out there, we can do anything. We can go to the moon. Heck yeah, we're going to the moon now. And back in Teddy's day, it was we're making the Panama Canal. We're doing, kind of the 19th century equivalent of these kind of major sort of things. We're going to build a new navy. Heck yeah, we're going to build a navy. We're gonna do all of these things. That there was so much optimism at that time, and that was such a similar sort of thing that you felt with both of them. So there is part of it that was they were the right person at the right time. And I'm not saying that anyone could have come around at that time. I'm not sure that Richard Nixon would have represented the same thing as JFK did had Nixon won the election,
Right.
which was really close, as you
Mhm.
know. I'm not sure that would have been the same thing. So you kind of had to have the right person at the right time. But this is one of those times where sometimes you just get lucky. And Teddy Roosevelt and JFK it would be hard to imagine a, a, a better choice for that moment in time from how did it make America feel? And how it really not only represented the changing of the guard, but personified it. And there are a lot of disagreements that people have about both Teddy Roosevelt and JFK, no question. There are a lot of things that they epically screwed up on. But why are they looked back on so fondly? Well, that's exactly why. Changing of the guard, new generation, this kind of optimism that is always a winning strategy. Optimism always is. And if you can really personify it and own it, and that's why, I mean, that's maybe a little bit of my bias showing is that, yes, I understand from a persuasive perspective, negativity can win. There's no question about it. Negative ads work. We know they work. Uh, we say they don't work so that you don't get really jaded, but they absolutely work. Uh, but long term, optimism works. I mean, you can agree or not with like a Barack Obama. There was optimism there and there was excitement and hope and all of those things. Optimism works as a strategy, to get people on board. And I think that's the biggest thing that I think about from a marketing perspective with JFK is how he was able to capture that optimism, hone it, and weaponize it.
Right. And I think, Jason, one of the interesting things about JFK is he had to market this American idea, but he also, studying him like I did, he had a lot of ideas that went against the grain. For instance, he was a peace president in a time where there was multiple potential for wars everywhere, and he was surrounded by a lot of hawkish advisors and people in his own cabinet. And then another thing is, he was set on, civil rights, and that was difficult in the Democratic Party because the Southern Democrats were so against that he actually had to work around that, going through different ways through the court system and with executive actions. Um, it's difficult, to go through all that and still market the ideas he was trying to market. And then you think about what you said earlier with Franklin Pierce and how Cuba could have became a state. That would have changed so much because by the time JFK comes in office, I mean, he's inheriting this situation in Cuba that's really getting worse. And of course, we know the Bay of Pigs was a disaster, and everything that led down the road, the anti-Castro movement and Fidel Castro and later Kennedy would try to at the end detente with Castro, and there's just so many things that would have changed if Cuba was a state. I mean, that's just fascinating to think about.
Yeah, I think when you kind of go back, just there are so many things that just are odd quirks of history. Like the that there is an island of that size, that close to the United States mainland. It's really the only one
Right.
that would have
Right.
worked. Uh, none of the Bahama Islands would have worked. I mean, they're basically sandbars.
Right.
The Dominican Republic and Haiti, Puerto Rico, those aren't close enough. They
Right.
just wouldn't have had that same like 90 miles
90
away.
miles, yeah.
90 miles. That's just so compelling. It's not compelling to say, 208 miles away in Port-au-Prince. Like, it
Right.
seems far. It just seems far, even though it's not. It seems far. Uh, and it's funny that, kind of how things developed in Turkey at that time, because those two things are we know now that they were very connected, missile
Right.
sites in
The
Turkey,
missile
missile
sites,
site.
yeah.
Yeah, that we didn't know until many years later that it was hey guys, we'll take our missile sites out of Cuba if you get them out of
Turkey.
Turkey,
Right.
because the Russians have always been really notably concerned about people invading overland because it's happened a zillion times.
Right. Sure.
Uh, so they're really, that gets them nervous. And, just to think about, okay, well, things could have shaken up differently during the fall of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I. Had that happened differently,
Sure.
Turkey could have been a very different place at that time. And how might that have changed that calculation? It's so unknowable. And that's why when people say, well, history rhymes, no, it doesn't. Like, we can't predict the future. If we could, all history professors would be millionaires.
Right.
But history rhymes. There's certain themes that, and patterns of behavior that tend to come again and again. And balance of power is one of those things. And what makes people nervous? And proximity is just one of those things that makes people nervous. It's no surprise that, the reason America kind of has the mindset it does is we have two very weak neighbors to the north and south. If you think about that difference in perspective than the German perspective, for instance, surrounded by very strong neighbors on all sides at all times.
Right.
Very different just kind of mindset and how you approach the world.
And we will be right back. DK's Corner, located on 802 East Lackawanna Avenue in Oliphant, Pennsylvania. Visit DK's Corner for hot and cold sandwiches, soups, salads, pizza, and delicious breakfast, including breakfast sandwiches, specialty coffees, and DK's Razzle Dazzle flavor shaken espressos. And take it from me, the best cheesesteaks around. Follow DK's Corner on Facebook and Instagram, or call them at 570-209-0278 to find out about their daily specials and catering. Check out DK's Corner, Oliphant's little hoagie shop. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. That's DK's Corner in Oliphant, Pennsylvania.
Bill, you got any names you want to give Jason that's not on the list?
So, not necessarily the name of a president, but well, so a candidate, and I did kind of want to talk about Hillary a little bit, and what she could have done to maybe to market herself better, because there was so much negativity around her. I think it was sort of the combination of people didn't like her, and here was this boisterous personality running against her that people knew. And Jason, I saw this was well after the 2016 election. Hillary was on the Howard Stern show, and she did like a 3-hour interview with Stern, and she really showed herself. She talked a lot about her childhood, and she talked a lot about her relationship with Bill and how it is real, and it wasn't a handshake arrangement. And I think had she done that interview prior to the election, how different things might have been. I feel like she just didn't market herself well enough during the run up to that election. Sure, she had some bad things happen as well, but I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
I think if there's a theme we've talked about today, it's what's most important is the number one thing is how do you make people feel?
Hmm.
And uh, the issue there wasn't, she focused, there are kind of two things you can focus on, the stake and the system. Okay, the stake is the policy stuff, the what are you going to do once in office, kind of the key issues you want to attack, how you want to attack them. There can be vision in there, but it can be really specific. It can get into those kind of policy prescriptions. No question, whether you agreed with her what she wanted to do or not, you weren't going to say that she didn't understand what she wanted to do, that she wasn't coherent.
Right.
You can disagree with it, but she had her ducks in a row there. What she didn't focus on as much was, how to make people feel about it. And,
Right.
think about the opportunity, how much of a layup that really was. So many people wanted to say, you know what, the United States has gotten to that point where, we crossed the barrier. Black person became president. Now a woman can become president. What are we all going to tell our daughters that, no, you can, it's not just President Barbie. You can actually look up to to a real person who became president. It was such a layup, to
Especially
just,
since, yeah, especially since, I mean, she might have been the most qualified person ever to run for president, not just woman, but person. I mean, if you think about what her life was, and everything she had done up until that point, it's
it's,
just,
yeah, it's really hard to think of people. We didn't really have people who were that qualified. We would have to look back to uh, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, people like that. I mean, like probably the most qualified person before Hillary Clinton might have been John Quincy Adams, John Adams' son, who
right.
was a diplomat, Secretary of State, one of the smartest people, the United States has ever produced, the best diplomatic family the United States has ever produced, the Adamses, father, son, and grandson, Charles Adams. Uh, you have to go way back to find people who are really at that level of skill. Even like an FDR was not quite at that level. It did not have the kind of government experience that Hillary Clinton did. Not just being, an observer in her husband's two terms, involved in those terms, senator, two terms, if memory serves,
Right.
Secretary of State.
Right.
I mean, come on. I mean, what more are you looking for? So it's almost like she felt like she needed to kind of hit all of those. She felt like she had to overcompensate for competence. And I think people talk about gender things like that. And there's certainly some truth to that. But just the ability to kind of paint a picture of what it means for her to be there was a miss. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Jason, where would you put Richard Nixon on this list? Would he be closer to the five best or the five worst?
In my chapter on Richard Nixon, I talk about, he's such a polarizing figure. It's hard to rank anyone near the top who resigned. You can't do that. But on the other hand, had he not been frankly mentally ill and been able to hold it together, for a little while longer, he probably would have been in the upper middle tier, for sure. He did a lot of things that a lot of people feel are pretty despicable, kind of the Southern strategy. But from
Right.
a marketing and political perspective, he was quite astute, and quite good at what he did. Uh, Obviously having Kissinger around and other people to help was a big win. But I think about, someone like that, and what I talk about in the book is let's set all that aside and just look at the numbers. What happened during that time, and what you discover is that things actually went pretty well during the Nixon years. The United States, and this was a period of economic expansion, increasing wages, all of those sorts of things that, where you measure what quality of life for the average American, went way up during that time. Poverty went down. Uh, when you think about like, okay, well, was that just, kind of privileged people? Well, no, even people who were poor and, kind of in the deep South, they saw their fortunes increase and rise during that time as well. So yeah, it's such a missed opportunity, really. He had that potential. He was a president. He was president during a time when, boy, you really could do no wrong. He had all the face cards and still found some way to let the dealer beat him. That's too bad.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, the proof was, the landslide over McGovern. I mean, McGovern only won one state, Massachusetts.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen those sort of, things before where, like, gosh, you're just being handed. You're handed all the cards. You were handed, the best possible situation. You're handed the most powerful economy in the world. You know, uh, and yet you still find a way to bust at the blackjack table.
Right.
It's too bad. I mean, he's certainly not the first president to be mentally ill, but the one that probably had the worst impact, kind of the worst possible timing. Not a great time for that to happen because things were getting tense, and we needed something we needed better leadership during that time. Didn't get it.
Hmm. And then, going back to Carter real quick, I mean, he had the unfortunate position of, trying to clean that mess up, and almost like like a CEO of a company. If a scandal happens within the company and the CEO gets fired and the new guy has to come in and try to clean it up, it's almost a thankless, almost an impossible task, no matter what you do.
Well, if you think about like tough for Carter, think about Ford.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, completely unelected. So
Right.
he was appointed. So he was the
Right.
first unelected,
Yeah.
president.
Yep. Yep.
And imagine inheriting that steaming turd. And what people forget is he was handed two, not only the what to do about former president. God, what do you do? I mean, just the kind of thought process there, and it wasn't obvious what you were supposed to do. But the other one was draft dodgers. People who were
Right.
objected to the draft. There are a whole
Right.
lot of people. We forget a whole lot of people moved to Canada
Right.
during
Sure.
that time.
Yeah.
And what were you going to do with people who violated the law? Because if you had to call people up for another conflict and people thought they could get away with it, they could get away with not showing up for the draft. That's combat
Right.
readiness. I mean, that's the sort of thing that a commander in chief has to, that's one of those things where, yeah, that hasn't changed much since, we were throwing rocks at each other. If you're not going to show up and fight, someone stronger is going to come in and take over your stuff. That's just, I mean, ask the Ukrainians about that.
Right.
Like you got to be ready to. Your boys have to, get out there and be ready to pick up a rifle. We don't like to think about that much. It's certainly not a real marketing question, but it is when you think about how you communicate to people. And so I think Carter had an opportunity. I just don't think he was well suited to the job. And I think the opportunity was Ford did the dirty work.
Sure.
Then Carter was handed like, okay, fresh start here. Let's find a way to make this better. And yeah, he was handed some bad cards too, no question. But just he struggled for a number of reasons that part personality, part situation, part timing, part bad advice. But it was really after he left the presidency, I think, really blossomed into something that, yeah, really left and right wing folks now can be really proud of.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And last one for me, Jason. What about Bill Clinton?
It's another case where there was a little bit of that kind of generational shift. He represented a little bit of a kind of a newer face, right? You know, the the thing that I feel that he, he clearly was a strong communicator. He clearly understood, I think the real defining moment for him was when Gingrich took over. The House kind of had the Republican Revolution in 94, I want to say. I'm just, your listeners already know if I got that date wrong. Uh, but when he took over and he said, you know what? The whole conversation I remember was, well, is the president even relevant anymore? Is Bill Clinton even relevant? Does anyone care? And, 6 years later, it was pretty obvious that he was, and that he was able to kind of turn that situation on its head. He was able to co-opt positions that were right-wing positions. It was the kind of genius that FDR was really good at. FDR was really good at, when people forget, is that there were lots of people on the right wing and the left wing, and especially on the left wing in FDR's time, who basically were looking at Stalin's Russia and thinking, we got to do that thing here. And what FDR would do is he would take part of that position, kind of sand the rough edges off of it, and do just enough to kind of blunt the argument for doing more. Like, okay, hey, we did a little bit of that. We don't need to do more of that. Clinton basically stole that playbook. He'd take Gingrich's ideas, sand the rough edges off, make them his, and Gingrich and the Republicans couldn't not do it, because it was their idea. But it was kind of like Diet Coke. It was kind of welfare reform, but it was kind of diet welfare reform. It wasn't quite the same thing. You can't really say no, but not quite all you wanted either. And he found a way to make that happen. And it's a classic kind of competitive strategy where you blunt your opponent's momentum by stealing just a little bit of it. And it's real brilliance. All the other stuff he did, that's his own deal. Now, like I said, a number of our presidents had their own mental conditions. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
Bill, do you have any others before we move on to Jason's next book?
Well, did you want to touch on the Calvin Coolidge topic, or?
Well, Bill, how are we on time? Do we want to do that, and do we still have time to get into the other book? Because we can save Coolidge for another time.
Okay,
if Jason wants to come back, and
because that may be a whole hour.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a whole.
Yeah.
That might be an episode by itself, Jason, if you're willing to come back.
Yeah, that sounds fun. It's actually a wonderful kind of transition point too, because like I said earlier, Coolidge was the first president to be packaged, marketed, branded, and sold to the American people like a box of cereal or a new car. And
Right.
Evangelical Christianity was one of those things. Just as a preview of that, what Bruce Barton noticed is that there was kind of a problem at that time. You think about the evangelical Christian community, which is a big, big, big community, weren't really on board with the Republican Party. They want to stay out of politics. They're not going to be in it. So they were not reliable Republican supporters. What Bruce Barton was able to do was kind of unify basically what some evangelicals today call the prosperity gospel. That kind of, he kind of rebranded Jesus as kind of a business CEO, that he was kind of guiding his disciples, who were his VPs, to kind of create this movement, and really rebranded Christianity as, if you were in business, you were doing God's work by doing good business. You had to do business in the right way, but doing business in the American system was akin to, how Jesus had created his movement, back in the day, and that those two things were linked. Evangelicals, Christianity, the evangelicals generally, and many Catholic groups all kind of signed on to that and said, you know what, that makes sense to us. It clicked. And ever since, the evangelical community has been largely a gimme for the Republican Party. They see themselves as joined at the hip. And it was sheer brilliance. You can actually read Bruce Barton's book on that. He had a book on the Bible and a book on Jesus specifically. For that, talk about both of those things, where he kind of laid out the case for it, and shockingly effective. Just hard to understate how transformative that really was.
And Coolidge's quote was, "The business of America is business," right? That was his.
That's correct. Yep, that's written by Bruce Barton, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Bruce Barton wrote all his speeches. So, I mean, just think about this, having an advertising genius, and there's no question Bruce Barton was an advertising genius, in the top 10 of all advertising folks the United States has ever produced. Imagining having that guy run your campaign, and no one had done it before. It's not like he's, kind of marketing that today, where like, oh, everyone understands kind of how to do it. I mean, he was playing chess and everyone else is playing checkers. It wasn't even close.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is a good transition point, Sean, if we want to go into the next book.
Yeah, let's talk about Booze, Babe, and the Little Black Dress. Give us an overview of the book, Jason.
Yeah, Booze, Babe, and the Little Black Dress is all about the birth of consumer culture in the 1920s. And most people think about the 1920s as the Great Gatsby and the Roaring 20s, and basically the big party that ended with the stock market crash and the hangover that was the Great Depression. So it's kind of viewed in these moralistic terms of like, well, be careful about partying too hard, because if you do, you're going to have a big Great Depression afterwards. And I found in my own research on Coolidge, Hoover, and Warren Harding, who were the presidents during that time, because I thought that way too. That was my, I hadn't really questioned that perspective. And what I learned from doing that work on those three presidents was, oh, wow, this is really different. This is when my field was born. The 1920s, we had more products. See, before then, people think about like, well, we figured out mass production. We could make a lot more stuff, back in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s. Well, that's great. But if people can't afford it, that doesn't really, you can't afford the stuff. It doesn't matter if you have a lot of stuff.
Right.
So you needed to have a more robust, banking and credit system. And conveniently or inconveniently, around that time is exactly when the Federal Reserve came into being, when the American financial system modernized, was right around that time as well. So you had this modern financial system that could give credit to people reliably, and you didn't need people like J.P. Morgan to swoop in and save things. It was too big for a J.P. Morgan to do anymore. So the Federal Reserve stabilized the financial system. Okay, great, you had them. And now you had the Committee for Public Information. Woodrow Wilson created a whole bunch of people, trained a whole bunch of people in World War I to sell war bonds, and basically professionalized advertising, public relations, and marketing. So you had a whole bunch of people after the war was over who needed jobs. And you had all these companies, these kind of growing companies, and they had money. They could get people to buy things, but they needed to make people desire those things. They needed to market those things. And just conveniently, you had a whole bunch of people really ready to help them do it. So it's this confluence of those three things: mass production, mass finance, mass marketing, created this cauldron of this catalyst, really, for a complete transformation in the amount of stuff, the amount of choices we had as Americans. What I think is the most funny thing, and I know this is a long description, but it's a really fascinating topic. Uh, if I were to take you back, we were able to go in a time machine, kind of get on our imaginary, I always remember the old one with the big spinning dial on the back. Kind of a child of that
Yeah.
era. We go back to 1927, and you dropped us off, and you said, "Okay, you got to make a go of things." Well, you have a mortgage on your house, you probably own a car, you live in the suburbs, you go to Sears to pick up some things, you go to the grocery store, at home, you got a refrigerator. Uh, uh, all of that stuff is, yeah, things that seem a little antiquated. You don't have the same tech you do now, but you don't have a computer, but you got the radio, and the radios are always on, and there's always someone yapping about something. It would seem thoroughly modern to us. Yeah, it'd take us a little time getting used to how to drive a Model T, but it's not that hard.
Yeah.
I take you back just 10 years before that, 1917, 1916. We'd all be lost.
Right.
We would not know how to operate in the world of 1917. And in 1927, we know precisely what to do. Our world completely transformed into the modern consumer era within 10 years. And it was the
That,
20s that did it.
yeah, that's so interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And no one had talked about that before. There are books about the 1920s, but they don't really capture that sort of, when you read about consumer culture, you always read about the negative stuff, right? That it's all kind of wasteful and blah, blah, blah. And what most people don't think about is, okay, well, yeah, that system has, can be wasteful at times. There's no question about that. But are you okay with just having one kind of peanut butter? What if that was it? Or, hey, if it's the winter, there is no fruit, none. Like that, it just doesn't exist. There is nothing about that. There are no choices. There
Yeah.
are no grocery stores. If you kind of like having like, oh, I like being able to have a certain amount of choice, and I like being able to choose what I want to do and kind of make my own decisions. I like being able to vote with my wallet. I can voice my pleasure or displeasure with a company by boycotting its product. Like I like to be able to do that. Well, that's it. Really, I think consumer culture is sort of the wrong way to look at it. I think about it as the birth of choice culture, where Americans learned how to choose en mass choice.
Right.
And that's what the people around that time, the bankers, the industrialists, the marketers completely didn't understand is they thought, and people still think this, that, Tim Cook at Apple kind of controls you. Nah, not really. If you just stop buying his phones,
Right.
he's done.
That's true.
Uh, I tell the story in the book about chapter one talks about the product ladder and kind of the model year change invented by Alfred Sloan and General Motors. Basically, what took Model T off basically knocked Ford to second place forever. They never got it back, and it was all about kind of creating consumer choice. And when you read Alfred Sloan's biography, kind of My Days at General Motors, he lived in mortal dread of consumer choice. He knew that it was critical, but he was terrified of the average consumer because he knew that if they chose something different, he's done. He knew it. He knew how precarious the situation was, even though they're the biggest company in the world, probably the most successful corporation America ever produced. He was scared. He was scared of you. That's what most people's perspective, they just don't think about it that way. They don't think consumers don't realize how powerful they are.
Well, and then contrast that with, with Ford saying, right, he said, give them any color they want as long as it's black, right?
He was a weird guy, and people who've read about him know that, that he is an odd duck. And he just did is kind of that moralistic kind of way that, hey, you only need one car. He
Right.
just made lots of versions of the Model T, and it was make it cheaper, 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 and more people can afford it. That's the most important thing. You don't need more colors. If, yeah, you know what you really need? You need to be able to kind of create this. If you want to make your Model T into a plow, well, you need a kit for that. You need different versions of it. You might
Yeah.
have a bigger family, so make a bigger version of it, but they're all Model Ts. You don't
Right.
need different cars.
Right.
You don't need different colors. You don't need different features. Like, even shock absorbers, guys, were aftermarket parts because you
Wow.
didn't need those.
Yeah.
That's kind of what he thought. Like you bounced around in that thing, and it's like people think the dashboard on the front of the car was, kind of came from the horses. The dashboard, they'd start to run and they would kick up the dirt, and that's why you
Yeah.
call it a dashboard.
Oh, interesting. I didn't.
Yeah, and it's funny how those things that kind of came from horses.
Yeah.
I mean, you still use horsepower and all that,
Right. Sure.
but we think about that. And we think, well, there's just as much vomit on the front of that dashboard as dirt on the other side, because it was not fun
Hmm.
to drive down those roads. No traffic signals, no nothing
Yeah.
at that time. Just crazy time. But it was consumers who responded to Alfred Sloan's idea that, oh, hey, you know what? I want a car with shock absorbers. I want a car that's a different color. I want cushions on the seats. I'd like not to throw up by the time I get a mile down the road. That'd be nice. Uh, and actually figuring out a way to do that from a manufacturing perspective is not trivial. Anyone who's in manufacturing that's in your listener base will know what kind of a debt they owe to Alfred Sloan's group and how they figured out how to not just make multiple cars within a line, like multiple Buicks, but they had to create multiple Buicks, multiple Chevrolets, multiple
Right.
Oaklands, multiple Cadillacs, multiple Pontiacs, all of those different cars in a way that made sense to consumers, in a way that wouldn't make General Motors broke doing it.
Hmm.
Just pure brilliance. But in all that smarts that they figured out, they always knew that if they couldn't satisfy consumer demand, consumers would just go somewhere else.
Right.
Simple as that. And they kept that front and center. They were really the first consumer-centric company, the very first one. And that's
Yeah.
why they were so successful. For 6 decades, they were basically
Wow.
the biggest company in the world.
And I think a lot of that is because, they built cars to last, right? They built them to withstand a lot. And, you look around today, you really don't see cars on the road, older than maybe 10 years. They just don't, they don't last like they did. It's interesting because I forget where we were going the other day, but I saw like a 1977 Oldsmobile on the road, and it wasn't,
I think I owned one of those.
it wasn't registered as a classic car or anything like that. It was just a guy who had this Oldsmobile, probably never wanted a new car, and it's still running. And it's just amazing that, that there was so much quality in what they did in those days. And now, things break in 2 or 3 years and you just throw them out and get something new.
Well, that's one of those issues that, people have with, consumer culture is kind of the throwaway that you make choices, but you're not really making choices with, kind of the complete life cycle of that product, kind of cradle to grave in mind, right? That, yeah, you make a choice to replace something. Well, what happens to the thing you replaced? Does it end up in, Bangladesh, and, some kids are picking through it for precious metals, like old cell phones? There's some real legitimate criticism of consumer culture out there. But what I look at, and kind of how I look at it, is yes, absolutely, those things are very legitimate. But in that kind of a system, you are able to choose a different sort of product. You're able to say, okay, I don't want to do that. I want my laptop or my phone to last longer, and I'm going to fight for right to repair. It's a big movement that hey, Apple lost that recently, by the way. Trying to kind of keep its closed ecosystem, and you're not really able to repair their products. And they have just started to publish repair manuals for them. Now, does everybody do that? No, but a little bit can go a long way. And, that combined with, some regulation that's needed there on extended producer responsibility and, a lot of those programs will help, consumers make better choices. More information is better choice. And price, frankly, is just a form of information. What is the total cost of that product? The total cost of a cell phone has to include how you dispose of it.
Right.
So as you start to work the price in, consumers will make better choices. So it really is that kind of what is the role of the government in order, in my view, and this is kind of shows a little bit of my kind of Austrian economics libertarian point of view. Some of your listeners will recognize that is make sure that producers cannot, because they're companies always try to externalize costs. That's what corporations do. They are trying to put internalize profit, externalize cost. That's the deal. That's how business works. But in my view, part of the government's key role is making sure they can't get away with that. That if a gallon of gas really costs $10 a gallon because of all the externalities, environmental cleanup, all of those other things, then that's what it really should cost. And if it does, would you make different choices about your car? You bet you would. So I feel like there are definitely criticisms about that. And as you talk about consumer culture, you inevitably go down that road. But I always thought the answer to that is more information and more choice, not less choice. And that's why, people like Stuart Chase, who founded Consumer Reports during the 1920s, by the way, basically started consumer review culture. How many people read Consumer Reports to make better decisions? I know I did. Buying my cars, I certainly will read it.
Right.
If you think about it, but people who know him a little bit better will recognize him as the person who was part of FDR's brain trust, who wanted to kind of copy the Soviet model. He wanted to reduce waste by reducing choice. He didn't think that there should be more choices than what people, using air quotes, needed. Right. And that the government should decide what you needed and what you didn't. That worldview and that perspective ultimately flew in the face of when you give people a choice and you say, well, you can either have a choice or you can have no choice. What would you prefer? Well, one's a winning strategy and one's not.
Yeah. Now, getting back to, what happened between 1916, 1917 and 1927, as we talked about, do you think, Jason, and I don't want to open up a whole can of worms here because we're running out of time and we've kept you a long time and we really appreciate it. But I kind of want to get your thoughts here real quick on if you think that all of that progress that happened in such a condensed period of time led to the crash and the Great Depression. Was it too much, too fast?
Probably. And, people think about the Great Depression as a financial crash, and it was that to an extent. But the causes of the Great Depression are myriad. There are a lot of things. It depends on whose axe is getting gored, who's at fault or that. But really, the more you read about the Great Depression, and this is the follow-up book to Boo's Babe in the Little Black Dress, is a book about consumer culture in the 1930s. Because only when, because choice culture didn't go away, people still made choices. It just, you only figure out who's swimming naked when the tide goes out, right? So you find out what choices were really important to people when they have to make them. In 1920s, you didn't have to really make choices. You just had an abundance of choice. During the Great Depression, you had to be really careful what you did. So we can figure out what was really important to people. It's a wonderful kind of crucible for that. But when you read about the Great Depression, I've studied it, not only studied the commentary, but the numbers. And what I would invite listeners to do if they really want to know about it is read diaries, read the primary sources. And when you do, what you realize is that the economics and all of the high-minded political stuff and the alphabet agencies and all of that, the Great Depression was a psychological depression more than almost anything else.
Right.
Yes, there was an economic angle, but people were scared and people were pessimistic. It was just a time that, it's almost like the 1920s were too much change, too fast, too much excitement, too much of that. You get to the 1930s and it was just the rubber band snapped back.
Right. The pendulum swings the other way.
Right. Yeah. So it was a kind of an interesting kind of 1-2 punch on, okay, it is almost like a hangover, kind of a psychological hangover. And it took time to kind of work through that. And both are really interesting for looking at how people made choices. In one decade, people learned how to make them. And in the next decade, they learned which ones were important and how to make the important ones, which is really a critical kind of, both of them, from my perspective, are two different ways to look at the same coin. But yeah, I think you're probably right. That's when I read the diaries and the primary sources, it's most people you read, it's funny. You think, okay, well, people in the Great Depression were fleeing the Dust Bowl and they were riding trains to try to find work. And you see the pictures and the stories and the Grapes of Wrath and all this stuff. You realize that for 85 to 90% of people who were employed, maybe not as well as they could be, but they were employed. Unemployment peaked at about 25%. But it wasn't that high for long.
Yeah.
So really about 10 to 15% was about as bad as it got generally. That meant 80 to 90% of people had work. But boy, I mean, think about how scary and demoralizing all of those kind of things are when you see it day after day, week after week, month after month. You see people losing farms, you see people riding the rails, even if that's not you.
Right.
That's scary. That it changes your outlook.
Yeah.
And that's really and the primary sources aren't, there are diaries of people who, had to kind of flee the Dust Bowl, and those are really compelling. Don't read those. There's plenty on that. Read the story of the people who are reading about that in Time magazine and who are like, oh my God, that could be us. And how does that change your mindset?
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Boy, this is such a Jason, I could talk to you all day about this. This to me is such a fascinating topic. I'd love to have you back on to, start talking about post-World War II recovery and, how things changed in the 50s. And boy, I mean, this stuff is, to me, it's just fascinating. Sean, I know, we're starting to run out of time here. We've kept Jason on a long time.
Yeah.
You want to get into before we wrap up?
Well, I just, mentioned earlier, Jason, when you were talking about the Apple phone and how people just say, stop buying it. It goes to, the shopping addiction. Like so many people are just addicted to a cell phone. People would be lost without a cell phone today. So, to have all these choices, they are addicted to choice. If you don't like the Apple, you go to another phone, or, the iPhone is always coming out with new versions. And it's just, people would just be absolutely lost without cell phones.
I think, addicted to choice is probably the better way to put it, rather than kind of, addicted to consuming, because we like to choose all kinds of things and they don't always involve, buying things. Now, I would argue that when people have to hand over money for things, it tells you what their choices really are. Because people have, opinions are like something that everybody has, and we won't use the words. This is a
Yeah.
family show. Uh, you know, when I think about, choice generally, I'd invite listeners to pick up a copy of Barry Schwartz's book, The Paradox of Choice. And I talk about it a little bit in my book in the conclusion, where choice isn't about happiness. People think about like, well, more choices makes us happy, and we like that. Uh, Not really. It's choice is what Barry Schwartz argues is kind of the obvious thing. Let's say you walk into a store and they have 30 versions of a phone, and you got to choose between 30 different models. That doesn't make you happy. It makes you anxious because the chances that you're not going to pick the right one are really high. You get nervous about the choices you didn't make because you're pretty convinced that you're not going to make the perfect choice. So what he demonstrates really convincingly is that too much choice does not make us happy. And that we should be thinking about fewer choices. And that's what a lot of retailers, when you think about Trader Joe's, Aldi's, Target, even Apple, you don't have a lot of choices. There can be a few options, but not too many, so that you can feel good about the choice you did make. But what people get wrong about choice isn't about happiness. Choice is about power. Who has it, how they wield it, and what it can do for you. And that's the message I'd probably like to leave for people. If there's anything they would take out of this after listening to the three of us yabber on for an hour and a half, is people feel like they are at the whim of Apple or the whim of Amazon or the whim of these big companies and these big forces outside of their control. And I would just remind you of General Motors was bigger than any of those companies. Biggest company in the world, an influence on the economy that we cannot understand today. It just in the 1940s, 1950s, General Motor control, I can't remember the percentage of the amount of the economy it controlled or influenced. Something like 18, 20%, either directly or indirectly.
Wow.
Massive, massive organization.
Yeah.
Lived in perpetual fear of your choice. Your choice to say, you know what, I'm going to go get a Ford. Or, you know what, I'm going to take the bus. I'm going to live in a place where I can just use mass transit. I'm not going to buy a car. That's the terrifying part to them. So most consumers don't think of it that way because they see Amazon as this massive company and they are just one person making one choice. Never, ever underestimate the power of just one decision to change things. It just starts with one person.
Sure.
One person saying, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. As more and more people do that, businesses will change to accommodate you or they will go out of business.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. You are the one with the power, not them.
Yeah.
You remember that.
Boy, that's so true. That's so true. I mean, this has been, and we appreciate your time, Jason. I know we've kept you a long time here.
It's been a blast, guys. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for having me.
Well, really Jason, one thing I want to ask you though, I know you mentioned earlier you have a book, follow-up book on consumer culture in the 1930s, but you have another follow. You have two follow books you're working on, correct?
Yeah, I kind of stole this idea from the romance industry. Romance authors love to do, trilogies and series. It's good for marketing and it's good for kind of storytelling. The guy,
Right.
George Lucas figured that out. At least
Sure.
he did once. And I thought, okay, well, you kind of have the 1920s as the origin of consumer culture. Kind of like here's how it came to be. 1930s is how how it was tested and challenged, kind of the Empire Strikes Back, right? It's going to be bad, going to be bad. Yeah. And then kind of Return of the Jedi is the 1940s. How consumers won the war, and more importantly, how they won the peace. That the consumer culture won out as and we only had to look another generation past that consumer culture, American consumer culture, basically was the winning idea, the winning global idea. Everyone wanted to be like the United States, mostly because they wanted to drink Coca-Cola and wear Levi's jeans.
Sure.
That is kind of the legacy of the consumer revolution in the 1940s was it won the peace after the war.
Yeah. And I'd love, if you would come back on with us, I'd also, I'd kind of like to get into, how the technology, technological revolution changed things as well with invention of television, how that changed the way we look at, certain things. And getting back to our early discussion, about the presidents, right? I mean, how now all of a sudden a president has to look good on television in order for, for that to translate, as part of their campaign. So if all these things are going through my head. Like I said, I'd love to keep you on for another 5 hours, but I think we all we all know that we have
we've done enough to your listeners.
I think we've done enough today.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason.
Marketer.
No, thank you.
Marketer in Chief, Booze Babe and the Little Black Dress. Those 2 books are available on our bookshop. We really encourage everybody to buy them. Jason, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it.
No, thank you both for having me on. Listeners, it was wonderful to spend 90 minutes with you.
Terrific.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.